Hey there Bristles, got some weird lighting right now because it's late in the day, and I am illuminated by multiple varying light sources. But anyway, you don't care about that, you care about painting miniatures, and that's why you clicked on this video. So following on from my hype from last week's video of getting the Warriors of the Dead painted from my Battle of Pelennor Fields box for Middle-earth strategy battle game, I am continuing with the Warriors of Rohan. It was a push to get these done. These are old models, not the new ones. I might do I may do a comparison video of the older and the new ones in the future once I actually build the new ones. I just haven't gotten around to doing that at the moment because currently building models is a special kind of hell for me. It's just not fun. There's just no humour for it at the moment. But anyway, enough of that. Big part of painting Warriors of Rohan, they've got big green capes, and the colour that I really struggle with is green. I know a lot of people struggle with like yellow and white, and yes, I find white pretty difficult, but there are ways to get it done easily enough. And yellow, one of the first times I really tried to push myself to improve as a painter, it was attempting to paint yellow because I had heard that it was a particularly difficult colour to paint, and to be honest, I did really well with it following a tutorial by a YouTuber who's actually still going, even though I watched these videos like 15 years ago, but Girl Painter on YouTube. She had videos for painting Imperial Fists, and they really helped me back in the day, so go check them videos out if you haven't. I don't know, I assume they're still there. But yeah, so I didn't really struggle with yellow. I really enjoy painting yellow and my Imperial Fists, but I'm waffling now. In this video, I do struggle with painting green on the Warriors of Rohan, but I get them done. And bit of a spoiler, I'm happy with how they look. They look good enough, and you're going to see that now. Without any more delay or waffling from me, let's get to the painting. Okay, so here I have a rough practice of a Warrior of Rohan that I attempted prior to making the video. I'm not too happy with how glossy it's looking, but that's the pitfalls of, you know, using some of the more modern Games Workshop washes. So anyway, moving on for the rest of them, and there's going to be some experimenting throughout this video while I get to grips with the model and how I want them painted. Again, I'm still intimidated by these smaller Middle-earth models, so we'll see how we get on. I've primed them with Mechanica Standard Grey, and I decided to pick out some block colours first, starting with Lead Belcher for the metallics, and now I'm using Doombull Brown for the reddish kind of brown material on their outfits, and Rhinox Hide for the darker leathers. If you're a returning viewer, you might be surprised by my selection of Lead Belcher, because in the past I have kind of bashed it a little bit, and I usually use scale color metallics, but this pot in particular is an older one, and I shook it really well, and it's performing how I want it to, so there we go. But yeah, and then I'm going to pick out the leather straps with Mornfang Brown. It's a lot of brown on these models, so just be prepared for that. And then for the cloak, I'm going to block that out with Merm Green from Fantasy and Games by Scale Color, Scale 75. The reason for using this paint is because I've actually just run out of any suitably dark or correct toned colors from Games Workshop Citadel, and I don't have any from Vallejo. I'm going to be expanding my Vallejo because I've been dipping my toe recently and I really like them. As you can see, this paint is not covering very well, but it's not that big of a deal because I'm using it for my mid-tone and just for the base, and I'm going to be adding darker greens for the shadows and lighter ones for the highlights. I also pick out some of the hair, a couple of them, you know, Rohan, there's a lot of blonde folk in there, so I've picked out the ones that I want to be blonde with Averland Sunset, and I've picked out the skin with Bugman's Glow, and I'm just going to coat some of the older grey haired individuals with some Dark Reaper, and then a couple with kind of brown or auburn hair with Rhinox hide. I could have done this earlier, probably should have, but here we are. And then you can see me picking out the bow here with Steel Legion drab, but I don't really like that. I end up going back and changing it, but I leave the spear poles, shafts, whatever you want to call them, I leave them that colour. And then some of them I want to be ginger, so I use rat skin flesh. I know, a flesh tone, what? But it's quite an orange tone colour. And also, let's not forget that they're just thematic names. When it comes down to it, the names are irrelevant and they're just colours. For my first attempt at doing the green cloaks in this video, I found actually a pot of Caliban green and decided to try using that to shade it, but it's not quite dark enough. And then I experiment with mixing some Rhinox hide into that, and you know, it's not awful. There's something there, but it's not really what I'm looking for. And you can see here on my palette, I have tried mixing a few different greens to try and get something that I'm happy with. I guess what I'm trying to say here is, like, experiment, mess around with your colors and see what you can kind of get. I end up then using another scale color paint here, a dark one, to try and highlight. There it is there, Riff Green. And to be honest, I don't hate it as a color, so I decide to use it instead of the mixture of Rhinox hide and Caliban green to shade my greens. And then the Merm green is going to be my mid-tone, so I'm going to come back and tidy up the higher areas with another layer of the Merm green and working this Riff green into the recesses. And you can see before where the opaqueness and thinness of the paint might have been a problem, it's actually quite useful in this regard, because I can put it in thick into the recesses and I can make a pseudo kind of layering blend transition by just wicking off my brush there on my thumb or on a piece of tissue and then pulling the paint around, mostly the medium there to the lighter areas and the pigment into the recesses. And I'm liking how this is looking. Some of my voiceover for this video so far, and it's probably only going to get worse, has been quite chaotic and a bit rambly, because due to the nature of the video, I just do a lot of experimenting and I'm forgetting, and I'm watching in real time as I speak. For the shields, when it comes to shading them, I use the Riff Green on the bottom of the shield, and then where it comes up to like halfway up the shield, I go back with the Merm Green and just slightly wet blend them together. It's a very small surface area, so it doesn't need to be pristine. It's just trying to have a little bit of fun, and I have fun trying to blend. If you've watched my videos before, you may be aware that I am not a huge fan of batch army painting. So anything I can do to make the process of batch painting more fun, I'm gonna do that. So experimenting here a little bit with Lothern Green for the highlights, which I rapidly decide I do not like the look of, and I go over it completely with Merm Green again on those raised areas, and just, you know, keeping it neat and not going too far into where I've added shadow with the Riff Green. And you can see my palette here. I've got quite a few mixes of green and whatnot on the palette, with just how much I've been trying to find something that works for me, because I'm still really struggling with the green. So here we have the next color I decide to experiment with for the highlights is Auric Flesh. I don't hate this. It's a little bit of a stark jump perhaps, so will we stick with it? At this point, I was getting a bit fed up of experimenting, to be honest, and not having much satisfaction from the painting process. So I do decide on this one solitary miniature to have a bit of fun playing around with textures and highlights on the cape, and a bit of wet blending with the Auric Flesh and some the Riff Green, which actually, it looks like a dark green, when you first put it on the palette and in the pot, but once you thin it about, you'll see on the palette in a moment, it leans a little bit more into the more teal end of the green spectrum. But yeah, so for this single model, I do wet blend the cape just to have a little bit of fun for myself and give myself a break from the monotony of batch painting, and just it's fun for me. But don't worry, I don't do the rest of the unit like this because that would take too long. Even though it only took me 20 minutes to blend this cape, I know it only took 20 minutes because I've filmed the entire process, and that clip alone was 20 minutes. So what you're seeing right now is part of that process sped up at 3 to 5 times speed. I can't remember what pacing I did for it, but anyway, so progressing with this, if you want to do wet blends and lavish a little bit more time on your Warriors of Rohan, you could do this, but I'm going to show you an alternative in a minute. Further on from what you've seen so far and what I've explained so far, I do move into pure auric flesh for highlighting. Realistically, 20 minutes per cape for a unit of 10. That's not too much of a time investment if you want to do that, but if you want to get them on the tabletop tabletop ready as quick as possible, I am going to show a different method, because realistically not everybody wants to wet blend and not everybody wants to spend that much time painting, because for a lot of people painting isn't something of joy, it's just a means to an end, and the real joy is getting them on the tabletop. So for the next highlight, I've added pale sand to the auric flesh, give an edge highlight around the perimeter of the cape, and a little bit of a highlight on the folds. I guess I fooled myself and lied to you, because I do a little bit more highlighting than that with this mixture, because I do go across the I don't know what to call it. My brain, I'm having some mental constipation right now. But there you go, on the front, glazing in and blending in some of that roof green again. I am tempted to cut some of this out, but I don't think I'll bother, because I think it's still nice to see, should you wish. If you don't want to see it, you can just skip. So here I'm prepping for the quick method, and I get the paints that I just showed you in the wet blend ready on my dry palette. So that's pale sand, merm green and auric flesh, and I just dry brushed them. But then once I've dry brushed with the auric flesh and the pale sand, I make a thin glaze with the merm green and apply it over the model. And here's a comparison of, there's the first one, my test model, there's my one that I spent 20 minutes on the cape, and here's some dry brush ones, which, to be honest, look kind of rough. So that's all the experimented ones, and now we're going to move on to what I actually use for the final product. And I'm going to take some Agrax Earthshade. This is an old pot that I found in the back of my press cupboard, and I'm just going to put it on, not too heavy, I'm going to be quite controlled with it and not let it pool anywhere, because pooling is when we get a particularly glossy finish. And as you can see here, that's not the glossiest finish. It's a little satin, but it's matte enough for my liking that I'm not completely disgusted by it, because I really hate a glossy finish from washes, and it's why I usually abstain from using them. I also put the Agrax Earthshade over the guide that I spent ages on, and it looks a lot more dirty and rustic, I think. Or maybe I'm just lying to myself to make myself feel better. But also I used it on the dry brushed ones, and I think it helped them a lot, and really added to them. But moving on, let's push on with the final method that I've settled on for doing the majority of the unit. So I've got merm green and lime green from Vallejo. Merm green isn't from Vallejo, but I mixed them up anyway, and I think that looks kind of like goblin green if I'm not mistaken. And then I take goblin green from my nostalgia paints and it puts them on the palette next to it, and actually no, it doesn't. The goblin green that I have here is much more desaturated. Obviously it's not the original goblin green, so maybe it's not the same color, but anyway, here you can see I'm mixing up that lime green from Vallejo and the Merm green from Scale Color, and I keep adding more and more Merm green until I get it dark enough. Not so dark that it's just Merm green, but dark enough that it's a color that I'm happy with. And I'm going to highlight up the capes after washing them with that Agrax Earthshade. And I'm going to keep the darker color in the recesses and go for some nice contrast with this. Now, it's not a huge jump in color, like we're not jumping into the more yellow green like I did before, which was a lot of contrast, but there's enough contrast here that it looks nice and it looks a bit more natural, which if you're going for something closer to the movies, that's kind of what you want. I'm determined to try and get some kind of green that I'm happy with, because Rohan is one of the factions that I was most looking forward to actually having. So I really want something that I can enjoy, or something that I at least know by the end of it I'm going to be happy, even if the work is a slog and it's a challenge. The other main faction that I really want is kind of a mix. I don't actually know if there's a legit army list for it in the current rule system, but it's a combination of Lurtz and Ugluk, I think it is, and they're Orc Scouts, but I don't actually own any of the current Orc Scouts, Uruk-hai Scouts, sorry. I do have some of the metal ones, but not enough to make an actual list, and I also want to use Grishnak and possibly Snaga and some Mordor Orcs, but I need to also get some Mordor Orcs. And for the next step, I've taken both those previous colours and added some pale sand and got this lovely minty kind of green. So I'm going to use that to highlight, and I've slowed things down here so you can see just how steady I'm trying to be, because I don't want to overdo it. I do overdo it a little bit here and there, but I'm not going to stress too much about it. The important thing is getting them done, and once I have this one done on camera, I move away and get up really close and uncomfortable and bad for my posture, bent over the model, and highlight up the rest of them using this color and this method. As you can see, a much quicker method, and aren't they just looking gorgeous in their lovely Rohan finery? And now we'll wander on back over to the browns and highlight up the reddish browns with the Doombull brown. Now this is the color that I used to base it, but we've shaded the entire model with Agrax Earthshade earlier in the video, so we're just gonna keep that shading in the recesses and highlight up with that original Doombull brown, and then we're going to take some Bugman's Glow and mix that into Doombull brown for another highlight. I always like using flesh tones or something like a light beige close to a skin tone for highlighting up my leathers, which makes sense, of course, because although actually, is this a leather? I'm unsure if this is leather or some kind of fabric, but anyway, never mind, I digress. Now we'll move on to the actual leathers, confirmed leathers, yes, and as I said before, these got it covered in the Agrax Earthshade as well, so I'm just going to re-establish some highlights, and thankfully the Agrax Earthshade isn't gone glossy in the recesses, so it's still nice and matte. And then to highlight these up further, I'm taking Steel Legion Drab and mixing that into the Rhinox Hide for another lovely highlight. And you can see here, actually you can't because it's not even in focus, but this fella, I really like this model. I just like the stance he's got. It's kind of defiance and open. It could be read as readiness to accept a challenge, or he could be observing or just waiting. Anyway, just filling the void with nonsense chatter, and yep, just highlighting up with that. Don't want to go too bright with these. I want to keep them quite dark. And then here we go with just Steel Legion Drab and I've slowed it down again so you can see just how careful I'm being. I'm not painting super fast. That's just some movie magic, and just some fine highlights all over on these dark browns. And then we'll speed it up again. You may notice now I actually just don't bother highlighting up the boots at all. You can of course do it, feel free, but I know that the way I'm going to base mine, there's going to be plenty going on the base, and I don't feel like not wasting time, but I'm going to cut some corners where I can to save time, so I'm just ignoring the boots. I've left them, I've washed them, highlighted them with the, I keep forgetting the name of it, Rhinox hide, and just leave them, and the base will look nice and you won't even notice the boots. So now I'm going to highlight up the belt straps with the original colour, which is Mornfang Brown, and that's going to make them look, just pop out a little bit. And then I'm going to highlight them with XV88, and here we see I have slowed it down once more, so you can see I am taking my time with these tiny, these are very sparse, they're very small areas of detail and very few of them on the model, so I'm just going to take the time to put a tiny highlight on them and call them done. And then I remembered that I completely forgot earlier in the process that they have these little crests on their helmets. Oh, whoops, I just banged into a paint rack. And also the pommel and the crossguard or hilt of the sword, they're usually a kind of bronzy color, so I've used Balthazar gold, and I washed them with I'm fumbling my words. I wash them with Agrag's Earthshade, and I go over the metals as well because I want them to be slightly duller with Agrag's Earthshade with a second coat. And to be honest, I entirely forget to come back to the bronze areas to highlight them later. So, but it's fine. I don't really care. They're very minor details, and there's not much of it, to be honest, on the models. But I also put this onto the spear handles, which I earlier in the video painted with Steel Legion Drab. And you'll see that the bows, I actually just went over them with Rhinox hide. Then to highlight up the metals, I take some Mithril Silver. Now, I have this a very long time. I don't think they still make it. I'm pretty sure they have something else with a Stormcast name, but I don't have it on hand because I remember trying it before and I didn't like it. But just use any bright silver that you have on hand, your brightest one, and just a fine highlight. Once you actually get past the filling in of the block colors for the base colors, it tends to speed up, or feels like it's speeding up a little bit once you start highlighting because you're doing less. It also would have been a lot quicker if I had already figured out how I wanted to paint the green, but sometimes that's just how the project goes. So for the white on the shields, so far they are Mechanica Standard Grey with a wash of Agrag's Earthshade, and then I layer them up with Celestra Grey and just keep the previous colours in the recesses, and just 2, maybe 3 layers of Celestra Grey should be enough, probably just 2, it's quite a good covering paint. And then finally for the white I use Dead White from Vallejo, and I kind of use the opaqueness on this to have like some of the previous Celestra Grey showing through on the lower part of the shield, just a little bit, but then making sure that I have full coverage and multiple layers on the upper parts. And back to the skin for a final highlight of Cadian Flesh Tone. I've gone back and forth between the skin and the hair because I need to get an idea how far I want to push the highlights on the skin, based on the framing of the colours around it, because they are tiny areas, so they need to stand out. For the blonde hair, I highlight that with Ungor Flesh. The ginger hair, I just re-establish the highlights with the main colour, the base colour, which is Ratskin Flesh. For the brown or auburn hair, I use Doombull Brown, and don't forget the beards. And then for the owl fellas, the owl granddaddies, use Dawnstone to highlight the grey hair and the grey beards. Then, this is actually the final highlight. Kislev flesh, because I just felt like I needed a little extra punch, and this is just tiny highlights on the cheeks, the nose and the fingies. And now that's them done. There are some things that I forgot, but they're not noticeable, so I'll just let the beauty shots roll, and I'm happy these are done. I still need to do the riders on the horseback, but I'm going to take a little bit of break because I feel like I need a change of pace, and I need to paint something from a different setting, just so I don't get a little bit burnt out on this. Also forgot to say, I use Steel Legion Drab as a dry brush on the backs of the shields, which had been coated with Rhinox Hide and Agrax Earthshade. But yeah, just a dry brush of Steel Legion Drab over that and on the wooden spear handles. So yeah, if you found this video useful or liked it at all, do let me know down in the comments. I reply to all of them, I hope I haven't missed anybody. I'll check that soon. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. I have a Patreon, still nothing on there yet. All of my work has been delayed over the past month due to medical reasons, nothing serious, so I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day, be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Bristleboss out.